drumming background. So we'll talk a bit about it later.
We will indeed, yes. Now, you are sort of semi-retired, aren't you?
Yes.
It's doctors, I don't know, they seem to retire early these days, don't they?
Well, that makes me young, doesn't it? Little does you know.
All right, well, we won't go down that line. But your last occupation, you were at Adam Brooks Hospital?
That's right.
And what was your speciality?
So I'm a surgeon, and I treat people with head and neck problems, head and neck cancer mainly. So I treat people who have a malignancy of the thyroid perhaps, the salivary glands, the neck, the throat, nose, ears, everything in the head and neck except the eyes and the brain. So everything about the collarbone really, so yeah.
Amazing. Can I ask you, the very first time when you were, I don't know, maybe just being a student, or just newly qualified as a surgeon, and you put the scalpel in for the first time, did it, I don't know, did you faint?
I didn't, no. Do you know, I was looking forward to it. It might surprise you really, but I was. And all the time you're training and you're preparing yourself, and that's what you're going for really. And you're not on your own. There are other people around you. There are bosses there making sure you do it properly and stuff like that. I was excited rather than frightened.
Really? We won't go down that line any longer, but it's fascinating. Now, I ought to say, a couple of years ago I had an operation, and it was done by a robot of all things, which was, anyway, we leave that. Let's go back to your background. So you were brought up in Africa, weren't you?
Yes.
Which country?
So I was born in Kenya. Anybody from Kenya here? No, I can see one or two Africans, but nobody from Kenya. So I was born in a tiny village called Yala, which is just north of the third largest city in Kenya, called Kisumu, on the Lake Victoria. So that time I was there, it was a very small village, a dirt track with a few houses on the side, just about 10 families living there. Quite remote and quite simple in the sense that there was no running water, no electricity, no roads as such, best of all, no school.
So you didn't have to go to school?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Imagine not going to school without playing truant. It's wonderful. And so, how long did you live there?
So I was there until I was 13.
So for 13 years you didn't go to school? No.
I did for a very short time, for 6 weeks. I went to Kisumu. To go to school, you had to go to a different town. My two brothers, elder brothers, who went up there, but I didn't get on really, so I was sent back.
Your mother and father, what sort of jobs did they have?
Yes, so as you probably guess, I'm from an ethnic background. I'm Indian. So mum was born in Kenya, but ethnically she is from India. And she used to run a little shop in Yala. And the shop there sells basically everything. The people would travel from all around the village and would come and buy the stuff. Mum ran a little shop.
A mini Asda.
That sort of thing.
Yes.
Very, very little. Micro Asda.
Yes.
And my father grew sugarcane and made juice out of sugarcane, made raw sugar out of sugarcane. And that was then used by the Africans to make alcohol. Good like alcohol, basically, called changa. Very strong.
And did anybody educate you? Were you taught to read and write by your parents or anybody at all?
So I could read Gujarati, which is my mother tongue in India. I knew the alphabet in Gujarati and I could read that.
Right.
I still speak fluent Gujarati as such. I knew a bit of maths, arithmetic, because in the shop you have to learn.
Yes.
Exactly right. You have to be able to make sure you get the right change and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's about it really. So.
Amazing life. Do you look back with happy memories for those?
Very much so. You know, life was very simple, but that's all I knew.
Yes.
You know, and it was fun in the sun, playing with the African kids, and it was just, it was lovely, absolutely lovely.
And if I met you as a 12-year-old and said, Piyush, when you grow up, would you like to be a doctor? What would you have said?
It wasn't even on my radar. So I would have probably said, what do you want to do? I'll maybe perhaps take over the shop, or take over the sugarcane things, or do something like that. And I wouldn't even have thought about being a doctor.
Amazing. So. Clearly then, there was a very big change in your life when you came to the UK. How old were you?
So So I was 13 then, and you may know at that time, Idi Amin was in Uganda and causing all sorts of political mischief as such. Kenya was going through a similar phase, but much quieter. And things were quite difficult for both mum and dad, particularly if you owned a business. And they could see the writing on the wall. So they had to leave with 5 children, leave everything behind to come and start a new life in England.
Huge step for them.
Yes, and Kenya at that time was a British colony. And they all had British passports as such. So half the people came here. There's a huge migration. Half the people came here, the other half went to Canada. But that's when.
So where did you go to Yorkshire? Because I would have thought that's the most obvious place. But
God's own country.
Indeed.
Now we went to Buckinghamshire. A tiny village called Westbury, only because mum and dad had some distant relatives who had a business there. And that was obviously.
And did you know English when you arrived?
No.
You know English?
No English.
Wow. And people round about in Westbury wouldn't know Gujarati.
No.
So how did you get on?
Difficulty at school, particularly.
So you went to school?
Yes, I went to school.
When you used to school, you knew no English.
And the issue is that, in England, you go to school and you're placed in a classroom according to your age, not according to what you know. So I was together with the 13-year-olds. Yeah. And Buckinghamshire at that time and still has a divided system. So there is, in those days it was secondary modern and grammar schools. Now it's comprehensive and grammar schools.
Yeah.
And of course I hadn't been to school, so I was sent to a secondary modern.
And how quickly did you pick up the language?
So after a couple of terms, my father just wasn't happy that I should be in that school. So he wrote letters and he fought on my behalf, and I was transferred to the grammar school provisionally to see how I'd get on. And I must say, the teachers were very kind. So I would stay behind after school on a one-to-one basis, and they would teach me English.
Really?
So by the end of the year, I was home basically.
Wonderful. And so you have a positive memory for that first year, despite the challenges?
Not entirely.
Because?
Well, I think you can guess really. So being of a different colour, somebody who can't speak English, somebody's different. Children are naturally very cruel to somebody who's not part of that gang. So, school life initially was quite tough. So it was,
and religiously, so back home in Kenya, you were Hindu.
Yes.
Presumably, there was some sort of Hindu temple you could go to somewhere. But you come to Buckinghamshire. I doubt if there are many Hindu temples there. What was happening religiously in your family?
So you probably know that every Hindu family would have a shrine at home where you would light a flame every night. You would pray, say your prayers and devotions and things like that. But in a typical, for example, back in Kenya, for example, there was a temple. You would go to that on a Saturday. Nowadays, if you went to England and if you saw people, they would go to a temple. There would be lots of festivals and social gatherings. Almost all of those would have a tinge of religion mixed with social things mixed in together as such. But of course, we didn't have any of that. So we were just at home with that little shrine at home doing that.
And were you, as it were, a believer? Because they have many, many gods. You believed in those many gods?
I was a believer, yeah, absolutely. And I grew up in it. And I was brought up as a Hindu. And I prayed to Hindu gods. I would carry around with me later on a little picture of a Hindu god. Almost, looking back, almost superstitiously, really. That's something, yeah.
Well, it's an amazing start to life. And I'm going to jump on a few years because obviously you did well at school. And went on to study, well, I don't think it was medicine to begin with, was it?
No. So initially I went to study dentistry in London.
Right.
So I was there at a place called London University. I did dentistry there for 4.5 years. And then after that I went into a field called maxillofacial surgery. So maxillofacial is basically surgery of the jaws. So when people have broken jaws or oral cancers or stuff like that, or misshapen jaws, and how to fix that. So I went into that after.
So let me just understand what you've just said. You studied to be a dentist and then a doctor.
Yes, after that.
Yes.
So I did dentistry, then maxillofacial at that level, and then later on I went back to do medicine, and then became head and cancer surgeon.
Wow. Okay, so
therefore I'm not young Roger.
Yes, but I just think it's incredible that you did that, and a remarkable period of time. Now, what was happening socially as a young doctor, etc.? You know, in London as a young doctor, you'll have a lot of admirers and friends, etc. And I'm sure that was true of you, wasn't it?
Yes, and the life was great at that time. I was blessed that I could study well, I could pass exams, and I did all my exams very well. I passed my postgraduate exams at the first time. Most people take 3 or 4 goes at it. The pass rate was about 14%, so you know, it was, I was good at my job, and I played a lot of cricket and hockey, and I captained my uni teams, and I had lots of friends, and life was, it was
wonderful.
Yeah,
in so many ways. And you had some lady friends, I think.
I lost some lady friends. So I think what you can see, Roger and I have spoken about this. He's alluding to a particular question.
I love the gossip.
So, particular lady friend Roger's talking about is when I was working as a maxillofacial surgeon, and I was quite a junior. I was called for the senior house officer, which is born out from a house officer as such. And I was working there with another senior house officer who happened to be a girl. And we both of us provided cover for the department. It was 24/7 cover. So we were either working in the daytime or on call at night time. We alternated the night time on call. We were working really hard, and yeah, it was quite busy. And you can see where this is going. 2 young people working hard, spending all the time together. We began to go out with each other. But the sad truth now, looking back, Roger, is that she knew quite a lot about me, but what she didn't know was that I already had a girlfriend.
2 times.
So I was 2-timing her. Somehow, I'd acquired 2 girlfriends at the same time.
That's complicated.
Very.
Right, now the one you were working with, I think she was a Christian, wasn't she? And did she talk to you about Christianity?
Not much. But can I just paint a bit of a picture about things? Do you know the only way you can make this happen is you have to tell a lie to cover your tracks, then another lie, and then you tell a lie to cover up your lies, and life was becoming just a mess and a life of deceit. So we didn't talk much about her Christian faith, but you know, there was something about her which I found very different to me and very compelling. I think the word I would use would be transparency as such. And the more I was with her, the more I realized that actually I was a bit of a sham. I had a facade in front of me. Apart from the lies, there was much other things I would see in my heart which was just not good and horrible. But of course, you never saw that. All you saw was my wonderful things, how clever I was, how good sportsman I was, how many friends I had. But deep inside me, I knew what was going on. And the more I saw and was with her, the more I realized what a mess I was in.
Now, it's one thing to have 2 girlfriends for a little while, but eventually the truth will out.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, you can't keep these things forever. And so there was an infamous night.
Yes, do tell us. We'll sit back and enjoy your pain.
On most Friday evenings, a lot of the Friday evenings, the Christian girl would invite me to her flat, and it was very normal. I would go up there, we'd have a meal, we'd have a glass of wine, spend an evening together. It was just a lovely thing to do Friday after Friday. After having worked hard all week, it was just a nice time to just sit and just chill. So one Friday, I was invited to her flat. I went along. looking forward to it. But when I got there, they were both present. So I was rumbled. And although we laughed, it wasn't one of my favourite evenings.
No, I'm sure it wasn't. How did you react?
Well, actually, it was very sad. It was full of tears, full of recriminations. How could I do this? How could you do this, Piyush? And accusations. And it was just a terrible, terrible evening. You think it's a funny story, but actually it's a very sad story. And sad not just because I hurt two people, but sad because of the mess I'd done, and the horridness of my behaviour, and it was terrible. It wasn't just, it was a really terrible night. So that night, I knew that I'd lost both of them as girlfriends. I went home and I couldn't sleep that night. I was so hurt about what I'd done. I was so disturbed about the mess I'd made. And I just couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, an interesting thing happened. The Christian girl phoned me up. She said, Piyush, I forgive you for what you've done. We still need to work together, so I forgive you. And Roger, she must have said that out of the kindness of her heart. But that was like another dagger into me. Rather than making me feel good, it made me feel even worse and even more wretched. How could she ever forgive me? If the tables were turned, I could never forgive her as such. And I was just so churned up, and this went on, and I just realized more and more. It wasn't just this particular thing I'd done. I noticed other things in my life which were just, again, not good or godly, and I was in a mess.
So, was it the bubble bursting, that everything was going so well for you for so long, and then suddenly it sort of brought down low? Is that really what's happening in your mind?
Yes, I think, please don't take this wrongly, but can I just say that I think it's very common for most of us to have a facade. It's very common, most of us, to portray our lovely side to the world outside, and to keep the hidden things inside us. And sometimes, one of the problems with, the Bible calls this sin. But the problem with sin is that it even makes you believe that you're not sinful.
Yes.
And it blinds you to the very fact of sin itself. I think that's what had happened to me. I think I was carrying on with these things, not even realizing the depravity of what I was going on. And then this incident shook me out and made me realize what I was really like as a person. Of course, I could show my amazing side to the world outside, but it showed me my real side without the facade within my heart.
But it was actually a significant moment, not only because of the pain you caused these two ladies and the hurt you with your self-feeling, but it was the beginning, wasn't it? It was a sort of kickstart towards considering the Lord Jesus Christ.
Absolutely, yes. Because, I would look in the mirror and I hated myself and I wanted to be different. I wanted to be somebody else. I wanted actually to be like that girl who had integrity and transparency and there was loveliness. And but she was like that, I thought, because she was religious. So I will become religious, I said to myself. And I went back to my Hinduism to try and help me to find that out. And but sadly, instead of Hinduism making me feel better, made me feel even more wretched as such. So that was no help at all. Again, I want to chat about that later, why that was the case. I also then looked at some other religions, again, they didn't help at all. Then I was invited to a church. Then I would go to not just one church, two churches. One in the morning towards East London, one in the evening to Central London. I just began to go to this church just to find out a bit more.
When you say you were invited, who invited you?
There was a nurse at work who took me to the church in Plumstead. And this Christian that I knew went to this other church in All Souls in London.
Yeah, All Souls is the big, sometimes when we see BBC News,
yes,
it's a church with a comical spire, and it's that church.
Exactly, so if you watch the news tonight, the opening graphics of BBC News is BBC's behind, there's a church spire in the front, So that's the church I went to.
And it's a Bible-believing church.
Yes.
So you started going to these two churches.
Yes.
It's a big thing for a Hindu to go into a Christian church. I don't know what you were expecting to happen, and when you felt, would you be alone or would there be hundreds of others? What was going on in your mind?
It was a very strange experience. I'd never been to a church. I didn't know what would happen in the church. And I would just follow the crowd. When they stood up, I would stand up. When they sat down, I would sit down. I'd try and make sense of it, but I couldn't understand most of it. I was given a Bible. Although it was an easy to read Bible, what was called the Good News Bible, of course I could read the word and understand what he was saying, but I couldn't make sense of it as such. But I couldn't stop reading it. I had to just keep on reading it. So I kept on reading the Bible all the time. And I was invited to a course, a bit like
Just Looking.
exactly, Just Looking course here, where I presume it's the same here. You sit in one hand with the coffee, the other hand with the Bible, and you just chat. Every question is fine. You can ask anything you want to. And so I went to a course a bit like that.
It's cheaper coffee here. But anyway.
Yes. But yeah, so if you ever been to a course like that, I do recommend it because if you ask me, did I enjoy the course? I didn't enjoy the course at the beginning. Because I was such an angry man. I had so many questions. I hated the fact that they were dismissing my Hindu religion completely, that the only way to God is through Jesus Christ. I didn't like the fact that every question I asked, they would open up the Bible, which I'd never read or owned or whatever, and that irritated me as well. But I kept going.
Eventually, it was a hymn, wasn't it, that really God spoke to you through the words of the hymn.
Yeah.
So please explain.
So this was one Sunday morning. I was at the church, and I couldn't sing at all. So when people stood up, I would stand up as well. And as they sang, I would just follow the words of every hymn. So I can't remember anything about that service, at all. I can't remember the sermon or the reading or the hymns, but until the very last hymn. And I stood up and they were singing, and the first hymn, and it's a hymn called "Tell Out My Soul." A lot of you would have sang it and know it as well. The first verse talks about the mighty deeds his arm has done, and I didn't have a clue what his mighty deeds were. And line by line, I just couldn't make sense of what this hymn was saying. But the third verse was as if that verse was written for me. Not the whole verse, but a particular line in that verse. And no line has ever spoken to me as powerfully before or since then. And it was as if this line was just written for me. And the line goes like this: "Proud hearts and stubborn wills are put to flight." And I just began to realize my pride and my stubbornness through this. And that afternoon, I went home, and that just kept on ringing in my head: proud hearts and stubborn wills are put to flight. I couldn't shake this out of my hand at all. But things began to change then. For example, that evening, I went to the other church at All Souls. The experience this time was different. It's a big church, full of people. Instead of just being anonymous, this time it's as if the pastor was speaking just to me and nobody else. Why is he picking on me as such? And the next day, I went to this course again. The name was Agnostics Anonymous, AA. It's an interesting name. It just so happened that evening they were speaking and they were talking about this thing called the cross. I'd never heard of the cross. I didn't know what the cross meant. They explained to me the cross was the wooden cross on which the Lord Jesus died. And they would have told me lots of things, Roger, at that night. And 90% just went above my head. I couldn't make sense of it at all. But there was the kernel, the 10%, which just gripped me, which was that it was through the cross I could have my past completely forgiven. And remember, I was in such a mess. I wanted to be different. I knew how terrible my heart was. And I began to realize that actually through here I could actually receive forgiveness. I didn't know how or why, but I knew that this was an offer. I knew that I could begin again and begin a new life. So that evening, I went home for the first time, I knelt by my bed and prayed for the first time to the Lord Jesus. It was a very simple prayer. I just basically said, I'm sorry for the mess I've made of my life. I said, please help me to live differently with you as my Lord. And yeah, I didn't know much more. But only the whole journey from beginning to go to church to this point was only 5 weeks. It wasn't a long time at all. So I was just, but I knew enough. I could cross with what I needed to go.
You found forgiveness.
Yeah.
And how did that outwork itself? What difference did it make to you?
So that night, the next morning, there was no dramatics at all. There was, but you know, I had a real sense of deep, deep peace within me. I knew that I'd been washed clean. I knew I no longer needed to have this facade. I knew that I could be who God has made me. And I needed to be ashamed of all the things I've done. And I could begin to live a new life with Him.
Wow. Did you go to your Christian colleague and say, can we start again?
No, I didn't dare do that. No, I didn't dare do that actually. We obviously continue working together, and end of that, this was in February 1982, and that summer, of course, jobs changed, and I changed jobs, and that was the end of that.
Are you still in touch with her?
Yeah, you know, I actually met her last Saturday, after 20 odd years, and we were at a meeting in London. Do you know the meeting was at All Souls Church?
Oh, really? Okay.
It's also the church where I actually got married as well. It's also the church my daughter, when she was in university, went back to. Yes, sir.
Now, I want to ask about your daughter. Time's running out, but I've got two biggish questions. And this one is a very big one. And your daughter works for the BBC. She works on science programmes. But she was diagnosed with the very cancer that you're a specialist in.
That's right. So one of the cancers that treat is thyroid cancer. And when my daughter was 15, you know, as all young girls do, she was in the bathroom, dancing in front of a mirror, as they do.
How would you know that? Anyway, you know that, yeah.
I would hear the music. And I take forever in the bath. And she found a lump in her neck. And she came downstairs and said, Daddy, I found a lump in my neck. I said, Libby, yes, there is a lump there, and that's in your thyroid gland. The next question, Roger, was, Daddy, could this be a cancer? And having felt it, I thought it probably was a cancer. I said, yes, Libby, this could be a cancer. I had to be honest, and I was honest to her. And I said, yes. So long story short, she had treatment.
Did you blame God? Were you angry with God? Because there's an irony about her having that particular cancer. But any cancer leaves you with questions and issues. Did you feel angry with God?
You know, I never did at all. I completely trusted the Lord and His ways and His purpose for my life. And I knew He'd have a reason for what He's doing. I absolutely never. You know. Now, if you'd asked me as a Hindu about the cancer, for example, you know, Hindu friends I know would say that she had the cancer because of the things she's done wrong, either in this life or the life before. So this was karma. This is the punishment for the things she's done. And you know, and I often speak to Hindus and say, you know, how can there ever be fair? She doesn't even know her previous life, nor what she's done wrong. And you know, karma is I'm afraid it's such a cruel system. And you know, there's no need to hold on to karma. You go to the Lord Jesus and He washes the clean.
Piyush, were you able to operate on her?
No, I'm not allowed. I was, you know, I would have loved to have done it, but the rules say that as my daughter, I can't.
But she's fully recovered.
She's fully recovered. She's now 26. Yeah, she's.
And just very quickly, because time has gone. Clearly, you know, you're an intelligent man. You're a scientist. We often hear, you know, name that's sort of faded away now, but Richard Dawkins would say it's impossible to be a Christian and be a scientist. But you are both, aren't you? Do you find any contradiction?
You know, Roger, none whatsoever. And, you know, a third of the room would be my consultant colleagues in the hospital would come, not religious, but would come. And I would invite speakers to come. And some of the speakers I would get to speak would be like the person who's now replaced Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, as you know, was a professor of cosmology in Cambridge. He's died, he was an atheist. His replacement is a Bible-believing Christian. So Stephen sees no contradiction between standing up as a Christian, yet performing world-breaking research. And he is a world authority. I have many friends in Cambridge who are scientists who are what we call FRS, Fellow of the Royal Society, and extremely bright. So there's absolutely, you can do science as a Christian or a non-Christian. But you know, actually, the more I've thought about it, Roger, I can go even a step further. Again, ask me about this later if you wanted to. That actually, science is only possible through a belief in God. Because, very briefly, even our rationality, the way we think, that helps us to do science, even that points towards a God. Even things like mathematics points towards a God. This friend of mine who does cosmology, you know, he would say that actually the whole of the universe is coded in mathematics. It's amazing that you can actually do maths, predict a subatomic particle, go and look for it, and you find it. I mean, that is just you can't explain some of these things without a God being there, designing there. There's much more I could say, but
yes, I'm sure. Well, actually, Piyush did say at the end, could we have an open time for questions? We've got a tight schedule, but at 8 o'clock, obviously, we invite you to stay. There are gorgeous refreshments if you look hard for them. There's some very grubby looking cakes as well. But by all means, do gather around Piyush and chat and ask questions. But I know, just before you go, what does Jesus mean to you, Piyush?
Can I say, I'll say two things, if I may. And both are, there's a bit of the Bible which is the Psalms, which are basically poetry. The psalmist says this, that your love is more precious than life itself. Now, Christians amongst the room here would understand what the psalmist was trying to say. That although we have life in this world, there is something more than that, and the love of Christ, the love of my Lord Jesus, is far more precious than even life itself. He goes on to say, another psalm says this, for example, who do I have in heaven but you, and what has this earth that I desire more than you? You know, we've spoken about forgiveness, which is the beginning of my Christian journey, and there's much more to the Lord Jesus than that. And I'm now united to Him. I feel in my life by His Spirit. He gives me a hope and a joy. He leads me. He strengthens me, and there's a hope in Him. You know, one day I will die, as we all will. And the death for me and for a Christian is like going to sleep and waking up again. And yeah, it's...
Yes, Jani, thank you so much. Shall we show our appreciation?